Hello and welcome back to Fixing Fallout 3. Sorry about the clickbait, but this is not actually a video about the DLC.
Gotcha!
It's actually part 8 in an ongoing series where we take the vanilla story of Fallout 3 and touch up the writing, role-playing, and world-building elements to make it the equal of some of the franchise's other titles. And if you're at all interested in how we got to this point, make sure to check out the earlier episodes first. But as a quick recap, last episode we covered the Enclave attack on Project Purity. Sticking to our philosophy of keeping as close to the vanilla story of Fallout 3 as possible, we did what we could to add some more depth and gravitas to this moment, while introducing an intricate backstory for James, Catherine, and Dr. Lee that better explain the vision and purpose of Project Purity itself. The first half of our rewrite was mostly linear, for first-time players at least, with plenty of opportunities to sequence break for others. And during this time, our character, an orphan in our rewrite, was primarily focused on finding James in order to find out more about their past and about the mysterious faction that attacked Vault 101 in the beginning of the game. Whereas his death now opens up the narrative to a more non-linear direction. We've already traveled all across the wasteland to find him, so it's now time for our character to start making their own judgments about the path they want to follow going forward. Perhaps they want to honor James's request, working with the Brotherhood to eject the Enclave from Project Purity and find their long-lost adoptive sibling. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they resent James for orphaning them in Vault 101 for 18 years, for being a part of the group that abducted them from their original home. Maybe just for the wild goose chase that it took to find him. Or maybe they don't care about any of that, and they just want to return to wandering the wasteland as soon as possible. Our version of the narrative now accounts for all of these possibilities, and each direction will be a viable path into the endgame. Okay, all caught up? Good. So as we emerge from the Roosevelt tunnels with the surviving scientists, having flooded the tunnels behind us, we end up at the Citadel. And here, part of me really wishes this moment was more cinematic, at least more than a gate opening and a few trainees in target practice, especially given how much the Brotherhood has been built up in the narrative. It's certainly no Pridwood moment. But for 2008, I suppose what we get is okay. So here's where we'll meet Owen and Sarah Lyons for the first time. That's right, I said first. You might remember that we replaced Sarah Lyons' introduction with Riley's Rangers, who in our version of events have been fighting the good fight against the super mutants in downtown DC, while the Brotherhood has remained more elusive. And at first glance, this might seem like a detriment to the story. Sarah Lyons will end up being a pretty important character if we follow the Brotherhood storyline. I mean, given the changes we've made so far, Sarah and Riley might as well be the same character. They're so similar. Well, sure, but I don't really feel comfortable cutting either of these characters for the rewrite, so I guess we'll just have to roll with it for now. Perhaps we can set up some sort of rivalry between the two that will rear up when the Brotherhood and the Rangers, now one of our 4 main factions, eventually come into conflict, if we choose to allow it. But moving on to Owen, how do we handle him? Well, broadly speaking, I actually really like this character. On paper, he should be the most interesting NPC in this game. But unfortunately, he's basically reduced to a generic quest giver after the first time you meet him. Given his importance, this is a character that desperately needs more dialogue as the story develops. And the same goes for Sarah. As for the story, it's no secret that the latter half of Fallout 3's main quest is a lot worse than its first half. This is something we'll work to address in subsequent videos, but starting in the Citadel, it would help if this location wasn't so terribly designed. We'll be returning here plenty of times, but like the DC ruins themselves, a lot of interesting content is buried here, hidden by a terrible layout and no quest incentive guiding you to these characters. In a previous video, I mentioned re-implementing the postcards from Fallout 1 and 2 for larger settlements, allowing the player to travel to multiple sub-locations within them, and the Citadel would definitely benefit from something like this. So, moving on, I've already mentioned how the dynamic between the Lyons' Brotherhood and the Outcasts is the best written and most interesting faction conflict in this game, even if it frustratingly leads to nothing. But how do we reconcile this with our version of events? After all, the Brotherhood has still been a pretty reclusive force, almost a non-factor in wasteland politics throughout the entirety of our story so far. Well, I think there's still a way. Because while in our story, Lyons hasn't acted yet on his ambitions, that doesn't mean that those ambitions alone couldn't have been enough to drive the outcasts away. You've already seen how Lyons had been quietly sponsoring Project Purity, and had it seen completion, the Brotherhood would have already made the most crucial step in building soft power control over the wasteland, through control of the fresh water supply. So we can pretty easily keep Lyons' motivations intact even with our story changes, with the only difference being that the Brotherhood is not yet actively protecting the wasteland, by continuing to fight the super mutants. Lyons wants to abandon the Brotherhood's traditional policy of aloof neutrality in pursuit of actual state building in the DC wasteland, using control over the water supply to peacefully unify the disparate settlements and move towards the formation of something approaching a central government. Something that's been completely absent on the eastern seaboard since the Great War. For our purposes, this ambition alone can explain the origin of the outcasts, strict adherence to the Brotherhood's pseudo-religious values, and their original orders as dictated by the Western Brotherhood. And as the first non-Maxon leader of the Brotherhood we've seen in the series so far, the Outcast's conflict with Lyons should go even deeper than ideology. In the 200 years since the Great War, the cult of Maxon has become an integral part of the Brotherhood's identity, with some members even prescribing an almost divine right to rule to the dynasty. But the migration from the West gave Lyons, the leader who emerged from the ranks, enough of his own dedicated following to effectively usurp leadership and pursue his own ambitions for the wasteland. So as much as this conflict with the Outcasts is ideological, it's also a political judgment on the leadership of the Eastern Brotherhood, with every member of the Brotherhood and the Outcasts having their own opinion on the conflict that dictates their loyalty. And this is something that's actually represented pretty well in game, if you take the time to talk to all the Brotherhood NPCs in the Citadel and beyond. They'll all have something unique to say about the schism, and I think that's really cool. Fallout New Vegas gets a lot of credit for narrative design like this, but at least on this topic, Fallout 3 does this pretty well too. So overall, this part of the lore actually gets an A+ for me. The only drawback being that there's never any actual resolution of this conflict in-game, something that of course we are going to be addressing later on. But how about that migration? This is an aspect of the lore that could definitely use our attention. We hear plenty about the scouring of the pit, and all of that's a tease for the DLC, and that's all great. But what happened before that? We know Lyons assumed power after the original leader of the expedition was killed, but we don't know much beyond that. Given the current standing of the canon, it's not unrealistic to expect that we're actually meant to believe that the Lyons group walked all the way from California to DC. Same for the Enclave remnants, who decided to follow them, I guess. This should have been one of the most interesting lore drops in Fallout 3, but as it is, it's just a pretty goofy negative zone of information in the story, doing only the barest of minimums to justify the Brotherhood's inclusion. And obviously, I think we can do a lot better, because there's actually a pretty obvious loophole in the lore that we can use to tie up loose ends here. I'm, of course, talking about Fallout Tactics, Micro Forte's 2001 take on the Fallout franchise, which Bethesda and the fanbase in general has really given the cold shoulder in my opinion. According to BGS, Tactics currently holds a semi-canon status in relation to the rest of the series, whatever that's supposed to be. And unfortunately, it looks like that status isn't going to be changing anytime soon. But through Tactics, the solution to our problem here is actually pretty simple. See, the lore of that game was framed around the Western Brotherhood at some point after the defeat of the Enclave, instructing 3 Zeppelin airships to go east and to track down and destroy the remnants of the super mutant threat. Over the Great Plains, a massive storm crashed into the fleet, scattering the 3 airships all across the continent. The first crash landed nearby, with the survivors going on to become the Midwestern Brotherhood. Cut off from contact with the East, the new leaders of the expedition began to conscript tribals, forming a new army to fight back against the emergent mechanical threat of the calculator. And it's seemingly implied by the very messy story of Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, which, unlike Tactics, is considered explicitly non-canon, that the second airship crash-landed in Texas, leading to the formation of the Texan Brotherhood of Steel. But what about the third airship? The fate of that part of the expedition is never confirmed. And for our purposes, I think using the fate of that missing airship provides a very neat explanation to the appearance of the Brotherhood in the East, with the simple retcon of having that third airship crash land just outside of Pittsburgh. We put Lion's Brotherhood exactly where they need to be in order to sync up with the lore of Fallout 3. This works wonders in providing a more grounded and fleshed out narrative for Fallout 3. It patches up a pretty glaring plot hole and provides some more depth to Lion's Brotherhood now that we definitively know where they came from. And since we're keeping all the lore details surrounding the scouring of the pit, I'm not going to talk too much about that aspect of the lore here. That's something that you can already get plenty of information on in-game, by just talking to various NPCs throughout the Citadel. The only other detail we've added since that point is the Mutant War, when the super mutants first emerged from Vault 86, and almost wiped out all life in the capital wasteland. It was the Brotherhood that arrived at the 11th hour, breaking the siege of the Citadel, but then bullying the diminished Rangers out of the fortress, and taking up occupancy. So what exactly has the Brotherhood been doing in the 20 years since? Well, training mostly. Unlike in-game, our version of the Eastern Brotherhood hasn't gone fully native. Not yet. Opening up their ranks for just anyone to join, like the Midwestern Brotherhood was forced to. Lyons might be more liberally inclined than the Western Brotherhood, but his chapter hasn't yet shed all of the organization's unique inclinations. Not yet. Those few who survived the migration east or haven't gone over to the Outcasts are all old men now. And the only recruits that the Brotherhood has taken on since arriving on the eastern seaboard are the orphans of the pit, rigorously training them for the past 2 decades and instilling in them the regimented, stoic lifestyle that the Brotherhood is famous for. Most of them, all adults now, view Lyons reverently, an adoptive father to them all, and now they make up most of the Brotherhood's military, and thus the core of support for Lyons' regime. This is kind of a change that we have to make, because honestly, it makes no sense at all that a Brotherhood starved for manpower wouldn't immediately accept our help if we decided to join them. The player's disjointed relationship with the Brotherhood throughout Fallout 3's story is one of its weakest aspects, and we've already solved this by delaying the player's introduction to the Brotherhood up to this point. And it also adds more depth to the Lyons Outcast conflict by making more of the Lyons Brotherhood orphans of the pit. But still, that doesn't answer why they haven't moved on. What made Lyons decide that the capital wasteland was the place to implement his vision? And what were their original orders from out west that he's been so flagrantly disobeying? Well, the answer to these questions mostly lies already in the game. When the Brotherhood first arrived at the Citadel, they used their advanced technology to unlock the lower levels, discovering an enormous stockpile of weapons and equipment, perhaps originally intended for the Enclave when they re-emerged to take control of the wasteland. For our rewrite, we'll say that the largest stockpiles, those in the lower levels, have sat abandoned since the war, sealed behind advanced locks that the Rangers never managed to crack. But it was short work for the Brotherhood, and they've since come into control over a massive trove of military equipment, only without the means of ever possibly raising a force large enough to utilize all of it, or transport it back west. So this is where our own version of Lyons' grand strategy comes back into play. Without the means or willingness to police the wasteland, and with a strict dogma that prevents them from taking in adult recruits, Lyons' plan had been to use control over the water purifier to extract a sort of tithe, new recruits from the wasteland settlements. In exchange for clean water and protection, the Brotherhood would adopt the children of the wasteland and raise them into the next generation of recruits, forging an army that could truly police and settle the wasteland. But the re-emergence of the Enclave has shattered that vision. With the contamination of the water purifier, control over the water supply has irrevocably been taken out of the Brotherhood's hands. While within the Citadel, they possess all the means to wage war, but without any fresh bodies to fill the ranks. It's a dreadfully ironic situation. But Lyons isn't too stubborn to adapt. After a tour of the facility, he holds a war council, where he announces the Brotherhood's new strategy in the war against the Enclave. First, new recruits have to be found. So for the time being, they'll begin to accept new recruits that are qualified, providing you with your window of opportunity to join up, just as in the vanilla game. Remember, the Brotherhood is supposed to be our main faction for the game. The critical path we followed in this narrative so far is intended to be the default experience for a first-time player. So although we've already introduced the Rangers and Talon Company as joinable factions, like the NCR in New Vegas, the Brotherhood essentially acts as our default player faction if they don't intentionally decide to work against them. And joining certainly isn't without its perks. Like in-game, we'll get trained in power armor handling, and while we're at it, we'll actually give the player a suit. Because, yeah, in the vanilla game, we unlock power armor training here, but we're not actually given one by the Brotherhood until the very final quest. And I guess I've never really noticed before, because every playthrough, I always did Operation Anchorage straight out of the vault, to get the bugged suit of power armor. But I don't think there's really any reason not to give the player a suit here. I mean, it's not like they aren't going to just scavenge or buy one anyway. There's no point in power scaling here. But anyway, for the purpose of our rewrite, this will probably be our character's first opportunity to use power armor. Unless we've already managed to reach a high enough rank in the Rangers or Talon Company to qualify for training, or if we've happened to scavenge an ultra-rare training holotape from the Wasteland. So if we do decide to join, we'll report back to Lyons and the War Council to discuss plans. Were the radioactive leak to be contained and the purifier activated, the Enclave would be granted the same power that Lyons sought over the Wasteland, an unacceptable reality for the Brotherhood. The dark future that James sacrificed himself to prevent. The Brotherhood may have been dormant for 20 years, but Lyons is savvy enough to recognize that now is the time for decisive action. So he authorizes a first strike, but not against the Enclave. Have you noticed anything missing from the Citadel yet? That's right, where's the robot? Well, in our version of events, the Brotherhood doesn't actually control Liberty Prime yet. I mean, sure, our narrative works the exact same if they do, but I can think of a better use for this story beat. A major criticism of Fallout 3 has always been how much of a gimmick Liberty Prime seems to be. The final battle really falls flat on a repeat playthrough, given how unearned and static this moment feels. And if you aren't taking your time, exploring the Citadel, or combing through optional dialogue, you might not even notice the giant robot until the very final quest. That's a huge narrative oversight, and we can start addressing this weakness now by giving us a proper introduction. You might remember me mentioning a few episodes ago that Talon Company, now one of the game's 4 main factions in our storyline, are actually based out of Adams Air Force Base. Alright, so do you see where this is going yet? Our version of the Brotherhood campaign is about to kick off with the battle at the Air Force Base. If it's not obvious already, our rendition can easily fix the ending by allowing the player to play on after completing the game. So we have no use for the Broken Steel DLC, leaving us open to cannibalize elements from that and include it in our campaign. And it makes sense, right? Outside of the Pentagon, where else would you expect to see a pre-war, top-secret military project? Moving Liberty Prime to Adams gives us the opportunity to finally unleash some faction conflict, and present the player with a major story pivot. This is actually one place where we can take inspiration from, out of all things, Fallout 4. Remember, the Brotherhood is our default faction in the campaign, so this action-packed set piece will serve to tie the player closer to them through some good old shock and awe. Similar to the arrival of the Pridwin and the attack on Fort Strong in Fallout 4. The throw ride overawes us to the power of the Brotherhood because, wah, cool power armor people, before we peel back the layers and start to show the cracks in the facade, implying how a complete Brotherhood victory isn't such a rosy future after all, strongly encouraging the player to explore an alternate path on a repeat playthrough. Because what if the player isn't interested in working for the Brotherhood? What if they're already a member of Talon Company or the Rangers? Or if they just don't want Liberty Prime to fall into the Brotherhood's hands. This will involve an alternate path that will allow us to work against the Lyons Brotherhood. Say we choose not to join and try to leave. No harm, no foul, right? Wrong. Say we're already a high-ranking member of Talon Company, or the Rangers. In that case, Lions will have us detained, at least until after the battle. But as we languish in our cell, Scribe Rothschild, one of the Brotherhood's highest-ranking members with secret outcast sympathies, will free us. No longer willing to abide by Lions' decisions and imploring us to find some way to remove the Brotherhood from this conflict. This path could lead to an entirely different quest line, giving us the opportunity to weaken or even destroy the Brotherhood with our chosen faction. But we'll hold off on that for now. Today, we'll assume that the player is willing to join up, and will ride along with the Brotherhood into battle. They only have a few vertibirds of their own, and as we see in the DLC, the Air Force base is heavily fortified, making a direct assault impossible. So we'll tag along with the Lion's Pride into the presidential tunnels, while the main force makes their way overland. We'll enter the base from below and make our way towards the control tower, where we can shut off the main defenses. We'll initially be going up against your run-of-the-mill grunts, but we'll end up facing off against Talon Company's elite troops, maybe wearing Air Force power armor and jetpacks, something like that, before running into a surprise appearance of the Enclave, who, as we'll find out, have been secretly using Talon Company as a proxy. They've only revealed themselves now to try and keep Liberty Prime out of the Brotherhood's hands. Of course, we defeat them and win the battle, and afterwards we'll get our proper debrief and introduction to the big robot. And from here, our next steps then become clear. Unlike in the vanilla story, our version won't just put Liberty Prime on the back burner until the finale. We'll actually have to put in some work to get it operational. And there's still much more than that to be done before the war against the Enclave can begin in earnest. And now the objectives have changed. As the newest member of the Brotherhood, we're directed to head back out into the wasteland, while the forces in the Citadel continue to gear up for war. There are multiple leads that we can pursue. There are still several components that the Brotherhood needs to reactivate Liberty Prime, and to retrieve these, we'll work with Sarah and the other elite members of the Lion's Pride. We also have the opportunity to act as a sort of diplomat. Just as we had the opportunity of working against the Brotherhood, if we choose to follow the other quest lines, we also have the opportunity to act as a unifier, and bring together a coalition strong enough to defend against the Enclave threat. This will require delicate negotiations with the Rangers and other minor factions that will utilize the player's previous interactions with them. Sound familiar? We also have plenty of unresolved quest lines to pursue too. Before he died, James told us that his real child was the key to reactivating the Purifier, and we still have yet to find them. Finally, when we approached the Brotherhood before the attack, seeking an audience with Dr. Lee, we were told that the only thing the project could possibly need to be brought to completion was a GEC, a necessity now, thanks to the radiation leak. And most of all, we still don't know anything about the Enclave. Who their leader, the voice behind the radio, really is, what their motivations are, and where they even come from. To find these out, we'll have to journey deep behind enemy lines. So we still have a lot to do before we wrap up this campaign. But that, unfortunately, is going to have to wait until next time. Bit of a shorter episode today, I know, but I feel like the introduction of the Brotherhood deserved an episode all to itself. So stay tuned. Next time we journey back into the wasteland to follow up on some of these unresolved leads. And before I go, I just want to say thanks to the handful of you out there who've been following along with this series and encouraging me to keep going. I really appreciate it. Sorry about the delay between videos. Long story short, I got wrapped up in the Doom video for like 2 months, and when I finally got back to Fallout 3, I decided it was time to make the jump from Fallout 3 to Tale of Two Wastelands, a mod that ports over the entirety of Fallout 3 to Fallout New Vegas. Because, ironically enough, Fallout 3 on Windows is notoriously unstable, even more so than New Vegas. And nowadays, a modded playthrough of New Vegas is just night and day compared to the vanilla experience of Fallout 3. But this comes with trade-offs. It took me a few weeks to even build a stable mod list, and this decision meant that I had to restart from square one, gathering new footage and starting an entirely new playthrough. And I'll admit, I could have been more timely in this department, but to be honest, playing with this mod list was like re-experiencing the game for the first time all over again. and I really wanted to take my time and savor it. After all, I think that's ultimately the best headspace for me to be in for this kind of rewrite. So yeah, I hope that explains what's all been going on behind the scenes. It's a new year though, and the ball is rolling again. So hopefully the next episode shouldn't take me nearly as long. And if anyone wants to know more about the mod list I'm using, let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to make a video on it. So that's going to do it for now. Thanks for listening, and hopefully I'll see you next time.